So you might have heard of a project called Servo or Rust. I don't know if any of you are familiar with this. But now what we're doing is we're using it as an experimental platform for the immersive web. One reason that AR and VR never really took off, like we aren't living in the oasis from Ready Player One right now, are we? It didn't take off 2 decades ago, kind of because like it just made everybody sick, right? Like nobody wants to sit around throwing up all over the place to play a game or to hang out with their family or be in a place of business, right? Like that's not really what we all want in life. And so it turns out that one of the big problems was like, as we mentioned earlier, you know, you can do some finagling, right, by only rendering parts of a scene to make this more tolerable. But what we really needed to do was get our frame rate up. We needed more frames per second. And that's the only reason why I bring up, well, not the only reason, Servo and Rust, because that's how I got into working on mixed reality and immersive technologies. Is I was on Servo and I was doing Rust work, and it turns out that those are enabling us to build the immersive web, you know, full stop. Because with increased performance and increased, you know, the fearless parallelism that we can actually get a frame rate that doesn't necessarily cause cyber sickness in everyone who uses it, which is a huge win. And that's pretty much why I ended up in this area and why I'm here now. So now that we've taken care of, the issue of frame rates, right? We're done. We can just have an immersive party. Everyone's gonna live in the metaverse, right? Woohoo, yeah, break time. We're done, like that's my talk. We have affordable headsets, we can all use it. We can do long distance learning, we can do telehealth. Can do all of these cool things. But it's not that simple. We have a lot of new problems. And so I'm here to give an overview of some of these new problems that we've given ourselves. Namely the privacy and security issues that we're facing in this space that are fairly unique to spatial technologies. So I know we have some devices over there. How many of you have ever tried out VR? Okay, that's a fair number. And how many of you have tried out AR, but not like Pokemon Go, like a headset? Okay, and how many of you have played Pokemon Go? Or Wizards Unite? Like, I am real into that right now. And does anyone here consider themselves an AR or VR developer? Okay, well, maybe more, you know. So yeah, while you can use your phone to do VR and mixed reality experiences, I'm going to be focusing on head-mounted displays. So anything that you put on your face that occludes either fully or partially your perception of the physical world around you. And by that, I mean, so virtual reality, right? It completely immerses you into this digital, this fully digital world. Whereas augmented reality just overlays digital elements over parts of your perception of the physical world. And mixed reality encompasses both and anything in between. It's kind of a catch-all term because while the applications are different, they share many of the same aspects. So mixed reality, it's an interesting domain is how I like to explain it. Basically, what we do is we have a bunch of sensors on for an extended period of time, and they are collecting a bunch of data. Not only are we collecting all of this data, but we're also performing real-time analysis of all of this data. And oftentimes, we're feeding it into machine learning algorithms as well. And then we are acting upon the outputs of those algorithms. Many of these sensors provide data that we can then use to make inferences or to fingerprint users. For example, we're currently investigating whether We can determine that two virtual users are the same person across experiences, solely based on their movement and their gait. More concerningly, we have techniques like gaze tracking that can provide unexpectedly powerful insights into our psychology. And the way your gaze interacts with the virtual world can indicate things like whether you have autism or Alzheimer's or an anxiety disorder. It can also indicate your sexual orientation. So these are all very private things that, I know you're looking at me skeptically, and it's only been done in a lab environment, but we all know if you can do it in a lab, you're going to be able to engineer a game, say, that will elicit the same responses. And the technology is only getting better. And then it's important to note that the insights that we're deriving from this data, they might not necessarily be correct. My favorite example, because it's a very, very joyful and happy example, it's not, is consider a company that discriminates against gay people, right, against LGBT people. They do not believe that homosexuality is acceptable. It's against what they believe in. And now they are using virtual reality technology to perform interviews remotely. Well, what happens when they train their algorithm to weed out unsuitable applicants? They're going to take a training set that probably doesn't have any LGBT people in it. They're going to train an algorithm on that. It's going to use a neural net, which we all know are super easy to read and analyze the outputs of. Again, it's not. It's incredibly opaque even for experts. And then they're going to be making hiring decisions based on this very biased training set and this very biased approach. And there are a lot of problems with this. Firstly, we shouldn't be doing things like this. Full stop. That's unethical. And if you build this, you are probably not a good person and you're not invited to my birthday parties. The company hasn't explicitly asked about your sexual orientation. So they have kind of a pass when it comes to the legality of the situation. When we're talking about privacy, there's a lot of, it's not really a settled science, What is privacy? We don't have a definition of it. In Europe, we do have GDPR, right? But even then, everyone's definition of privacy, and there are many different legal arguments about what privacy is. So how can we enforce this when we have this opaque algorithm without any accountability, a biased training set, and data output from this technology that we don't really understand? It's a lot of problems all wrapped up in one neat package with a bow. And the problem is that we can easily exacerbate the existing biases that we have. Of course, we also have orientation sensors, to make sure that we know where in space you are. There are a bunch of cameras. We have RGB cameras for actually getting images and IR cameras for doing depth sensing. Let's see. You might notice that I have my front-facing cameras covered, and I'm sure many of you do. Can't we just do that in VR? Not really. I mean, if you want to walk into a bunch of walls and have tape all over your device, including the eye holes of your device, because that's how they do your gaze, right? It's just not practical. And to be quite frank, the technology doesn't work when you do this. And then we also have microphones, which provide badly needed usability. Has anyone here ever tried to input text in VR? And how did that go for you?
I'm developing my own solution to turn the things.
Fair enough. It's a pain. It really is truly painful. So a lot of platforms are relying very heavily on voice search instead. Like I said, privacy, it's not a new problem. Defining it is not a new problem. Defending it is not a new goal. It's just harder when we make it in 3 dimensions, right? And I know I'm smiling like a maniac because I like hard problems, and that's why I do this kind of work. We all have different risks and threats to evaluate. My solution for privacy in mixed reality context is not going to be the same as yours. It's not the same as my mother's, and it's not the same as, my neighbor. And so how can we create platforms and how can we engineer applications that are respectful of individuals' choices and empower them without just dumping all of the burden of a privacy risk onto our poor users' shoulders? So I'll talk a little bit about some applications now, namely social VR. So there's been an explosion of social VR applications, which raises a bunch of really interesting problems. How can we authenticate people? What is a virtual identity? How do we define virtually owned space? And how do avatars affect our sense of self? What do we do about abuse and harassment in these situations? And if anyone wants to talk about this further, I would be most pleased to allow you to buy me a drink later on. But for now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to focus on that last point, the abuse and harassment. This is an issue that every social platform needs to be concerned about. If you have a social component to whatever you're building, and that means like just basic sharing, you need to be concerned about abuse and harassment. Right? Like, this is something that we are behind on. This is something we have not addressed. And this is something that's really hurting both technology and people, right? Like, we're hurting ourselves on both ends of the spectrum. Social VR combines the worst of both of these worlds. You have the pseudo-anonymity of the internet, and then you have the presence and embodiment of VR. And what I mean by this is that harassment, and in particular sexual harassment, is much more viscerally felt in a social VR situation because you feel like you really are there. So it's almost like, you're being catcalled on the street, but it's by someone completely anonymous, right? You have no recourse. They could be anywhere in the world. Not that you have much recourse anyways. But so how do we build in muting and blocking and reporting and moderation mechanisms? We haven't done much of it, and we need to do better. At Mozilla, we have this lovely social VR platform. It's called Hubs by Mozilla. And we have a lot of ducks. You can go hang out in Hogwarts. This is Hubs here. And how have we approached this whole designing a private by default social platform? Well, first off, it is private by default. I create a room and then I'm like, hey, come hang out in my room with me. What I don't do is I don't just go into this wide open space that anyone can enter. You need to explicitly have a link from me that I have provided to you. Right? And sure, yes, that can be, then shared too widely. And then all you do is you just kill the room. You just destroy it and you start over again. It's great. Who doesn't love destroying their virtual spaces? I mean, that's like lesson 1 of building blocks, right? Like you build it and then you Godzilla it. We also have, as you can see, our avatars aren't human. So there are a lot of problems with human avatars that are pretty non-obvious in my opinion. For example, I as a woman, I'm not necessarily comfortable entering a social VR space as a woman. People of color often feel the same way. I was speaking to a black man who was like, I only ever enter social VR spaces where I don't know people as a white man because I simply don't feel safe being represented as myself. So on the one hand, human avatars force you to give people the options to accurately represent themselves. But we also don't really want to because we're punished for who we are in these spaces with little recourse, right? So instead of humans, we have robots. And who doesn't want to be a robot? I mean, to be fair, I would rather be a cat or a dragon. But robots are good too. And this also handles a few other issues of, in particular, gender, right? So it turns out that we can enforce existing biases based on virtual avatar embodiment. What I mean by this is that, I know I'm grinning like a maniac again. That's how you know that what I'm about to say is horrible. So what happens is, we have, school-aged children in VR, right? Now, let's suppose we take a boy, we put him in a girl's avatar. And we have a girl, and we put her in a boy's avatar. And then we have them both go take a math test. The girl will do better. The boy will do worse. Not necessarily comparatively, but compared to their normal performance, simply because it enforces the existing societal biases that we have of boys are better at math. I was embodying a boy, therefore I'm better at math. It's really weird, isn't it? You wouldn't expect that, but it's true. Yeah, and so we also have Discord integration if you need to tie people to an identity. There will be a blog post forthcoming on this, so I'll leave it at that. But the thing is, VR, mixed reality can be creepy. It can be terrifying, and it can offer a lot of really bad avenues. But it's also very promising technology. Going back to the gaze, we can use gaze as a pointer. So someone who's paralyzed and can't use, a mouse and can't navigate the web easily, they can use their gaze as a pointer instead. And that's really powerful stuff to me. So we see that mixed reality can be a tool for creating a more connected world. And this is a world where you can be present on the other side of the world in an instant. But we do need to address these problems of privacy and identity and safety now, before we've gone too far down the wrong path. This is more than just one person or one company. We need to engage everyone involved in the development, right? We need users advocating for their privacy. We need people involved in web standards, like we mentioned before. Like, I do a lot of privacy work on the immersive web standard. We need regulators who actually enforce privacy guidelines. And then what can developers do? Well, there's a lot you can do. First, if you don't need data, don't get it, right? Like, why would you protect data that you don't actually need? The classic example of an AR application is, I need to buy a new couch for my room. So I map my space and I put my new IKEA couch in the space and I'm like, oh, okay. Yeah, that fits. Oh no, that completely blocks my door. This isn't gonna work. So at this point in time, all we need are the depth information, because we just need to know the shape of the room, right? Once I pick out the couch, I'm like, I really need some help with the color scheme. I have a bright yellow wall. I don't like yellow much, but I have a bright yellow wall. What couch goes with my bright yellow wall? And at that point in time, we could then progressively enhance it to allow RGB camera access, right? And then, you can have some automated color helper, something like that. But you don't need that for the basic functionality, which is to just read the room. And then, in addition to the lean data and the progressive enhancements, right? Think about abuse and harassment from the start. How are people going to misuse this? Malicious users are a threat vector. They always need to be a threat vector. It's not just some outside attacker. It's not the NSA. It's not Russia. It's your users, because people like to do bad things when they can hide behind the internet. And so when we are starting things, when we're designing them, UX design, that matters. Back-end design, all of this matters for privacy and security. And so we really need to start shaping applications with that in mind from the beginning. I know that I really want this technology to succeed. Mixed reality experiences simply can't function without always-on sensors and cameras. Privacy is an existential question for this technology. We have found ourselves in the uncomfortable position in the past of choosing between features and privacy. But you know what? We don't need to. We can have feature-rich applications that are also privacy preserving. It just starts with responsible and respectful development, right? Like, we need to provide you, we need to not just be like, oh, give me all your data and then I'm going to do something with it later on, right? Think thoughtfully, right? Part of this is, how can we have privacy? The 2D web, I don't want to say that we're just done with it, because obviously we are not. However, we've made some bad decisions that we're kind of just stuck with. So now that we're moving on to this new world, this new 3D web, right? How can we take analogous functionality and do it in a privacy preserving way? So I'm going to talk a little bit about everyone's favorite thing in the universe, which is, of course, advertisements. We love ads, right? But no, really, we have to love them because that's kind of how the web is built, right? It's the web is built off of this notion that it's free and open and accessible, and people are paid based on ads. And I'm not here to debate whether that's a good or a bad thing. I do think that we need new incentives, but can we do ads in a less terrible way, right? So ads pay out based on engagement, right? What's the definition of engagement? Well, it depends. It used to be you visit a site, you've engaged with the ads that are served on that site. That was really easy to game. You just create a bot that visits your site a bunch, you get a bunch of money. It's great, everyone's happy except for the advertisers. So they refine it and they figure out, well, what really is engagement? So what is engagement when we're talking about an ad in a virtual space? Well, you look at it, right? It's the same as here. I'm looking at this projector. I'm engaging with the projector. And because we have, that was the first thing I saw. Sorry. I should have picked the plants. I know. I'll do better next time. So I look at the plant, and then the plant person is like, okay, sounds good. Here's some money. Or I look at the plant, and I'm like, oh, why, that's a beautiful plant. I would like this plant in my home, please, right? And then the ad person is even happier because it was successful. And the best part about this is we have the gaze data, we can provide the gaze data, and we can provide access to the gaze data ephemerally. You do not need to persist that data to measure engagement. And in fact, instead of giving people raw gaze data, that's what we'll probably do is create an engagement API so that you can access this in a less granular way. Because, as with everything, there is a downside. Our gaze, this is the best part of everything. Our gaze doesn't just tell whether you have anxiety or autism. It can reveal how we work through decisions. You know how some people are just really good at sales? We've all met someone who's just a sales genius. One of the things they're better at than most people is reading nonverbal cues. Powerful nonverbal cue, your gaze. And so researchers have actually indicated that your gaze does communicate details about your decision-making process. So imagine this excellent salesperson, but at scale, right? Instead of having to be one-on-one reading your body language, we can automate this And this is where I put the happy duck in, because to me, that's a terrifying thing. The thought of being constantly manipulated just because my gaze data is provided. I don't really like that idea. So we shouldn't do it. So what that means is that we need to start as we mean to go on, right? Let's not start by providing all of the data and all of the gaze data that you can then use for manipulation. It's a dystopic future if we don't start with privacy now with mixed reality. And because it is, we're still emerging. We're not an emerging technology. We are in the process of emerging. We have mainstream devices. We have mainstream applications. But it's not something that's necessarily entrenched in our daily lives yet. So we have the opportunity now. I think that it is safe to say that mixed reality is here to stay. It will continue to evolve rapidly over the next few years. And historically, we're not very good at incorporating privacy and security and encouraging ethical behavior. Users say that privacy matters to them, but then they're happy to trade it in for, they don't act like that. They trade it in for a few holiday deals, right? So instead of designing applications based around that, let's design them thinking, look, we can do things, we can make money in a privacy-preserving way. We've done it in the past. We should go back to that because, to be entirely honest, mixed reality it has incredible potential. And if we mess this up now, the dystopias that will result will mean that it never really becomes mainstream, or we just all accept a future that I know I don't particularly want to live in. It's a complex space, but it's fun. And we can have both features. We can have feature-rich applications that don't vacuum up data and throw them into machine learning just to see what happens, right? Like, that's, whoever thought of that as a model, like, we should never have done that. Yeah, we have an opportunity right now to do better. And that's why I'm here, because I know that we can, and I hope that we do. So thank you very much. Any questions? I'm sorry, I usually end up on a much happier note. This is my cat, Batman. Happy note, not dystopic at all. It's very cute. Any questions? Comments? Concerns?